CO News Weekly Recap, March 16 through 22, 2020. Bob Dwyer, Carbon Monoxide Safety Association. This is Bob Dwyer with the Carbon Monoxide Safety Association. This program, we're going to be presenting the news stories, a summary of some of the news stories that were posted March 16 through 22 last week. These are common CO stories and learning opportunities. We're going to talk about some indoor air quality events. The news site is going under some construction, so please be patient with us. But let's take a look at what our program is going to talk about today. One of the first scenarios I want to talk about is you just walked into a customer's house and your personal CO monitor sounded off as it rose over 25 parts per million, and now it's reading 33 parts per million, but your customer's CO alarm is silent. The questions are, when should you call the fire department? Do you know when the fire department puts on breathing apparatus? Do you know when the fire department begins their civilian evacuations? These are things you should know. You're a professional, you're providing professional service, so you should know when the fire department responds at what action levels of parts per million of carbon monoxide that they react to. You know, we've always referred to carbon monoxide as a poison. That's a toxic gas. However, it fits into helping with one of the news stories that came out, National Poison Prevention Week. They had it last week, March 15 through 21. But you know, just like fire safety is still important during this isolation of the coronavirus event that's taking place, every day is a fire safety day. Every day is a poison prevention day. We keep referring to carbon monoxide as a poison. Well, it's a toxic gas, and that toxic gas can kill us. One out of Akron, you know, asking people now, are you not sure if you have a cold or flu, worried about coronavirus? Well, they give some tips on what the Akron area residents should do. But, you know, make sure you're not suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. Get that low-level detector. Take a look at the levels. Some of your symptoms could be brought on by the constant presence of low-level carbon monoxide. And you'll notice throughout all these presentations, we are going to emphasize the health effects of carbon monoxide poisoning. Specifically, the low levels are the ones that we're experiencing. The poisoning can go unnoticed even though we have flu-like symptoms, and these symptoms can include headache, nausea, dizziness, achiness, constant stuffiness, changes in heart rate, sinus and head pressure, slower reaction time, infant and child fussiness, to name a few. Carbon monoxide, you know, when we take a look at the side effects of medicines that we take, a lot of times they'll give us these symptoms. So let's not get lost in this. Let's not get lost in our allergies now, the symptoms of our allergies. Let's make sure that we can eliminate carbon monoxide as a symptom. Let's measure for it. You know, and constantly we get reminders out of the war on record. You know, here's where people were killed in their sleep from carbon monoxide. Let's make sure we have carbon monoxide alarms. As service techs and inspectors, let's help make sure that our customers, clients, and fellow citizens that we serve understand the importance and value of carbon monoxide detection. That they may get, but let's make sure they understand how these carbon monoxide alarms work and why you make the recommendations that you do. You know, we at the Carbon Monoxide Safety Association have always recommended that every home and building have at least one low-level CO alarm and monitor. Well, and this article reminds us again of the 2 Upper Peninsula teens who died in a motor vehicle from carbon monoxide poisoning. We've got to be careful in those vehicles. Carbon monoxide from automobiles and trucks, boats, anything that burns gasoline, petrol. We've got to be careful with carbon monoxide and the exhaust emissions that are coming from these vehicles. Getting sick from toxic gas of engine exhaust and pollution is pretty common. It affects millions of people daily. We're a worldwide culture based on burning things. When we look up here at these simple cartoon drawings, there's things burning. Our vehicles, we're burning fuel, we're burning gasoline, we're burning diesel and petrol. You know, when we look at these simple drawings, we see the exhaust visible in a cloud moving away from the vehicle. But what about prevailing winds? What if you're sitting in your car waiting to pick up a child in line with all kinds of other parents, or you pulled off the road to answer your cell phone or to make a phone call? Let's imagine you're a law enforcement officer sitting in your always idling vehicle, or any of us. What about prevailing winds? What if that gas is blowing in under our vehicle, not just through open windows? A lot of times when there's snowstorms, people will say if you have to start your car and you're stuck in the snow, open up a window. No, it's more important that when you start your car for short periods of time, that the tailpipes are clear, you're totally aware of exhaust gas blowing back into the vehicle, even if it's blowing under the vehicle, and opening up a window may not necessarily be the only thing that will protect you from carbon monoxide. In those instances, you should have a carbon monoxide detector. The more you measure carbon monoxide, the more you realize how much and how often you're exposed to it. Well, there's the importance of alarms again. These are smoke detectors and smoke alarms. Here's a couple stories. One quick action by some people helped save these people's lives. But again, once more, make sure that we have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide alarms in our home. There are dozens of reports of structure fires weekly that come across the news services. Here's one that we call somewhat unusual. Stain-soaked and oily rags stacked and contained. They heat up. Spontaneous combustion blamed for this fire. Well, what do you think? How spontaneous is this type of blaze? You know, oil-soaked rags, could you hold an oily rag in your hand and have it unexpectedly ignite? Well, things take time. Things do take time with combustion. Combustion is a chemical reaction. In this case of chemicals reacting, we have fuel, hydrocarbon fuels, H's and C's, mixing with air, which contains predominantly nitrogen and oxygen. We're interested in the oxygen. And when we mix fuel and air together and we put them in enough heat, we generate a fire or combustion. So all combustion is a chemical reaction in heat. So sometimes it's rather quick. If you can visualize this diagram with the fuel being a piped in contained gas, and a thermostat has called for heat, and the thermostat releases a signal to the gas valve, and it opens up, and it is mixing with air that contains oxygen, and it hits a hot surface, or it hits a flame, and then it turbulates through the heat exchanger, and it becomes usable heat. And it takes time, a little bit of time, for that to happen. You take the case of an oily rag. If I had an oily rag in my hand and I had been working on some furniture or some floors or something, in the case of this old building, and I were walking down the street, that rag would not catch on fire. It wouldn't spontaneously combust. But if I were to throw it into a bucket and keep adding oily rags to this bucket and then cover it with some other trash and let it sit, well, that would insulate those oily rags. They would start to warm up because there's a chemical reaction occurring, because it's around oxygen. And pretty soon it gets enough heat just from sitting there that it ignites. Same thing has happened with hay bales out on a hot day, out in a farm field. Okay? We have spontaneous combustion. It's not necessarily really spontaneous. It has taken time. So combustion is the rapid oxidation of a fuel. So in our controlled fuel environments, we cook, okay? But sometimes our cooking gases are coming right into where we breathe. When you take a look at news articles from around the world, you'll find out that nearly half of the world population cooks over an open fire. That's a lot of combustion gases, and that's a lot of people putting combustion gases into the air, not only for themselves, but in the world's air. These carbon emissions come from gas. And every time you turn on the gas stove, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and nitrogen oxides contaminate the air. And this is why our constant message is do not use unvented systems indoors for emergency heat. That's hard to do when you're panicking because you're cold. You've got to make sure you're paying attention. If you can have carbon monoxide alarms where you are, make sure you have them, and make sure you have a low-level detector. And for those of us in the HVACR industry, this diagram is very, very important. This is something that you will use, something that you should know. And when you're running your combustion analyzers, this is very important information that you will always base your decisions on. And while we're making our decisions about combustion gases, as we take a look at more news stories, the air quality events and stories that are taking place, you can see that air pollution levels are starting to drop. Will we heed these lessons? Well, why are these levels dropping? Well, as more and more people, as it says with the coronavirus lockdown, that people are not going out into air and polluting it, and they're not breathing in polluted air. Will we learn our lesson? And we have to remember that bad things can happen, and sometimes we do them to ourselves. The case of a gasoline can sitting here by a natural gas or propane water heater, spontaneous combustion, or how long would it take for the vapors leaking out of that can to reach those flames? How about that water heater? You know, if we can buy that vent material that's made for something else, and if we don't know any better, we'll put it on. It's got a hole all the way through it. Combustion gas should go through there. Carbon monoxide is a toxic gas. It poisons us. Higher carbon monoxide level conditions include stomach distresses, fainting, heart attack, passing out and in, unconsciousness, irreversible brain damage, and death. Carbon monoxide is a toxic gas. That's a recap, March 16 through 22, the year 2020. I'm Bob Dwyer, Carbon Monoxide Safety Association. Visit www.cosafety.blogspot.com.